Welcome to the Desi Kidlit Community's virtual fall series. And welcome to our banned books pre-recorded conversation brought to you by Payal Doshi, Sadia Faruqi, and myself, Nadia Solomon. The pre-recorded session you're about to watch will explore banned and challenged books and the discussion taking our nation by storm. Again, my name is Nadia Solomon, and I will be your moderator. Here are some headlines pulled from Publishers Weekly, American Library Association, various news outlets showing lawmakers in action, claiming they're protecting children and supporting parents. We also show commentary from the Eric Hall Museum discussing protecting and expanding access to books for all. And notice some of the photos of the books in question that are being banned.
Advocates are sounding the alarm about a set of measures that they say target teaching and writing related to LGBTQ issues, race, and more broadly, freedom of speech. Around the country, efforts to ban specific books or even whole categories of books are on the rise. Jeffrey Brown has a conversation for our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
Can you tell me, does equity and inclusion also include incestuous relationships,
contentious school board meetings,
child-adult sex, and books that promote pedophilia,
and controversial decisions to remove books from the curriculum, political campaign ads,
It was some of the most explicit material you can imagine.
and moves in state legislatures to target subject areas and even penalize librarians who keep titles on their shelves. Books, especially focused on race and LGBTQ issues, are being challenged, in some cases taken off school and public library shelves. The American Library Association says it received 330 reports of book challenges in the fall of last year, more than double the amount received for all of 2020. And PEN America, a free speech advocacy group, reports that since January 2021, 174 education-focused legislative bills were introduced in 40 states that target content in a variety of ways. 162 of those target K-12 education. And it's spreading to public universities, with bills explicitly directed at higher education. PEN America recently announced a new book defense fund with seed money from Penguin Random House CEO Marcus Dola to educate the public and partner with local communities to fight book bans. There's a long history of book controversies in this country, says PEN America CEO Suzanne Nossel. But this feels different.
It's an intensification, far more book bans sprouting up all over the country than we ever saw before, more formalized efforts, not just a challenge in an individual school system or library, but legislation being introduced in state houses that would affect the availability of books, all over the state and every school and library. The ferocity of the debates and the link to larger political tensions and polarization, it's inflaming communities, and that's something we haven't seen before.
What books do you see most affected? Where's the impact?
It's overwhelmingly books by and about people of color and LGBTQ individuals. So it can be stories about a transgender kind of coming of age story, stories about slavery, about Black Americans and the Black experience and racial injustice in this country. So those kinds of narratives that are something other than kind of a pure, very traditional, what some people might think of as a standard old school American story.
And I'm sure you've thought about sort of why now? I mean, what happens in the culture to bring something like this to the fore?
I think it's a product in part of demographic and political and cultural change that is afoot in this country. We're becoming a much more pluralistic country without any one single dominant racial group. And there's a backlash to that. There's a sense that something is being lost, that the way people grew up, the stories that they read, the world that they saw decades ago is changing, and maybe changing too quickly, and that can be seen as threatening.
Because it is true that the book publishing world, school libraries around the country have in recent years introduced more books around gender issues, around race issues?
I think that's part of it. There's also a level at which this is politically manufactured. There is an effort to gin up support for certain parties, certain ideologies. There's a lot of frustration among parents after the last couple of years with schools being disrupted during the pandemic, debates over masking. And this is kind of a vein that they've tapped. You think about a pocketbook issue that affects somebody at home. This is a backpack issue.
But it is also still the case in this country, for the most part, that the education system is local, the public libraries are local. Who decides?
There are very well-established patterns. Typically, it's librarians who make choices about what to purchase. It's teachers and principals who decide what's going to be on the curriculum. Parents can be part of a school board. They can come to a PTA meeting if they have concerns. They can raise those. This is something different.
We are focusing right now, for the most part, on recent challenges from conservatives. But I know your organization has also done a lot of work around universities, the education system, on challenges from the left. Is our country now politicized in this way, in the way we look at books?
Yeah, I worry that sort of free speech is losing its grounding on both the right and the left. On the left, we see a lot of people, and particularly in a rising generation, who see free speech as kind of a smokescreen for hatred, as just a way of sheltering those who victimize and protecting bigotry, legitimizing bigotry. They've lost a sense of why it is that free speech protections are so fundamental to the movements that they're trying to wage, whether it's for racial justice or gender justice or climate justice. You need free speech protections in order to go to battle on those issues and be able to put forward your perspective, to challenge authority. So that's happening on the left. And then on the right, we see this kind of startling invocation of the means of government, the power of government, legislation, to dictate on the basis of viewpoint what can be in a school curriculum, what even can be taught in colleges and universities.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you think about writers and books through history have been revolutionary, they've been used as weapons, they've been used to push ideas forward, but you're seeing books being weaponized in a different way.
Yeah, but I think it's an illustration of just how powerful books are. I mean, we sort of think in the digital age, is anybody still reading? Do these books still matter? They still matter, and that's what we see in these battles.
All right, Suzanne Nossel, PEN America, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And take a look at the map of the United States with school book bans by state. And here's commentary from Suzanne Nossel, CEO of PEN America. She says our report demonstrates that today's wave of bans represents a coordinated campaign to banish books being waged by sophisticated, ideological, and well-resourced advocacy organizations. This censorious movement is turning our public schools into political battlegrounds, driving wedges within communities, forcing teachers and librarians from their jobs, and casting a chill over the spirit of open inquiry and intellectual freedom that underpins a flourishing democracy.
The American Library Association Library Bill of Rights comes out very strongly against censoring books. Libraries have a responsibility to provide a wide array of materials in all formats for a wide array of audience, and cover diverse points of view, and as the Contra Costa County Library's collection development policy says, we are not going to avoid things simply because they're frank and controversial. So there needs to be access to a wider variety of materials, opinions, and we don't avoid people just because of their views or their background. And the Library Bill of Rights comes out very strongly that librarians and libraries need to challenge censorship and support programs and groups that try to defend freedom of expression and right to access materials.
A lot of books, especially those that feature LGBTQ youth or talk about the impact of racism, are getting banned. Parents and politicians argue it's to protect their kids from content that they think is too mature or even harmful. But what if you are LGBTQ or a person of color and these books reflect your lived experiences? So, what's more dangerous then? The books themselves or banning them?
I am an author and illustrator.
I'm a best-selling author of many books.
I write books for young adults.
I'm a writer, I'm a journalist, and so many other things. The inspiration for All Boys Aren't Blue is the fact that the story that I have is a story that has always existed. It's just one that we weren't able to tell.
Flamer is a graphic novel about a kid named Aiden Navarro, who is 14 years old, and he is away at a scout camp in 1995. I think there are a lot of teenagers that are experiencing the same things that I did.
What if there was a really frank, honest, funny, informative text about relationships and sex ed designed specifically for young LGBTQ people?
I'm writing the books that, I wanted when I was a young person. I'm writing books about young gay people that are happy, that are experiencing trauma, that are finding love for the first time, falling out of love for the first time.
When Flamer first came out, I had this anxiety of like, some people I think might not like this, but this is my truth.
When I first learned about sort of the widespread opposition to We Are the Ants, things were different. Usually if a book is challenged, the book stays on the shelves and there's forms that have to be filled out and procedures that have to be followed, but books were being just pulled off the shelf immediately.
Oh, Flamer is definitely banned. It seems like every few days there's some news about a new challenge somewhere.
I just kind of thought it was going to be like a blip on the radar. I was wrong. By the time we got to January, I had hit 21 states. We were now reaching a real crucial point of changing the direction of education in this country, changing the culture of who has the right to tell stories in this country in a very dangerous way.
Often these very stressed librarians and teachers are kind of asking for my intervention, asking if there's anything I can do. It seems to have gotten markedly worse in the last 2 years. Young LGBTQ people are real. They are here and they desperately need help.
I was coming to terms with being gay and there were no books that I could find about what it was like to be, a young gay person. And that made me believe that the only paths that were open to me as a young gay person were that I was going to die of HIV, that I was going to wind up on drugs or a prostitute. As a result of that lack of representation and not seeing myself in depression, I attempted to take my own life.
We know that young LGBTQ people have worse mental health outcomes. We know that they're more likely to self-harm.
I had a hard time dealing with my sexuality, being called a wide range of racist and homophobic slurs, and had horrible body issues. I saw myself in almost every page of this. Thank you. And messages like that really hit home because someone else was basically having a parallel experience as me at the same time that I was feeling so alone.
We don't just write these books because we just want our story out there. All of our books are the maps that lead the youth and these teens down that road. And when you take that map away from them, they wander aimlessly in this world until they are able to either find that map or, unfortunately, until the world consumes them.
Take a look at this graph, also found on PEN America's website, where it states that among the 1,600 unique titles in the index, 41% explicitly address LGBTQ+ themes or have protagonists or prominent secondary characters who are LGBTQ+. 40% contain protagonists or prominent secondary characters of color. 21% directly address issues of race and racism. 22% contain sexual content of varying kinds. 10% have themes related to rights and activism. 9% are either biography, autobiography, or memoirs. And 4% include characters and stories that reflect religious minorities such as Jewish, Muslim, and other faith traditions. And take a look at these charts that show the types of books being banned. Nearly half of the titles were young adult books, but the ban also affected young readers' books, including 317 picture books and 168 chapter books. And of the 2,500 bans listed in the index, 96% were enacted without following the best practice guidelines for book challenges outlined by the ALA and the NCAC. And here are some headlines we collected from the National Coalition Against Censorship, with quotes from Lori Halls Anderson and Judy Bloom, and covers of children's books with themes of anti-racism, gender identity, immigration, historical fact, and a book about 2 male penguins adopting a baby penguin.
Does it surprise you, though, that the books that are being censored are the inclusive books, the books from BIPOC community or with immigrant roots? Like, does that surprise you? How does it make you feel, like, when you see that? Like,
sadly, it does not surprise me. It's depressing and very disturbing that we seem to be kind of moving away from democracy because I'm not sure why, but we do seem to be shouting each other down, and there is it feels like, against my opinion, a sort of an anti-woke backlash that is hitting books. I read that, also given this PEN America survey, that a lot of the book banning these days seems to be less individuals concerned with censorship and more groups tried to spread out the word and get people to complain to their school boards and schools and principals about books that they haven't even necessarily read. They've just heard that these are bad and should be removed.
That's so maddening.
And very disturbing.
Yeah. Now, what would you say to, you know, publishers, editors, writers, authors, you know, about the ban? You know, keep writing, keep telling stories. I mean, what advice would you give to them? Like, because that's a concern about that a lot of authors are feeling, because they're like, well, we're being told to write our stories, but then we're putting them out there. But then now there's like this rise in banning, censorship. And what advice or tip from your perspective could you give to them to, I don't know, encourage them to keep writing, or, you know, disregard this and just do what they need to do? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say keep writing, keep writing, and hopefully, there'll, in some respect, maybe there'll be a backlash to this push to censor. It will give them a certain notoriety, and people say, let's read what people are saying we shouldn't. How dare you tell us what we can't read? Let's go ahead and try to read it. Hopefully, the publishers will continue to try to publish. We certainly need to have lots more diverse authors and topics out being published. I happen to know at our library system, we are trying, and I think a lot of libraries are trying to work on the diversity of their collections, and they can be at a point where there aren't enough books and publishers getting the materials out there for them to build their collections like libraries would want. So I would say keep writing, and I would hope that it would be successful, but I don't really know.
As writers and authors of color, I believe that it is our job to keep writing, to keep telling the stories that we want to tell. Book bans are a way of silencing us, silencing our voices, silencing the fact that we exist, and we will not stand for it. Instead, we will keep doing what we love to do. We will keep sharing our stories with kids around the world. When you're at an event, a conference, a seminar, a virtual visit, keep talking about your books, how beautiful they are, how they celebrate the culture, the people, the diversity, and the myriad narratives that we have, because no amount of silencing is going to stop that. We are here to celebrate who we are, to cherish who we are, to be proud of who we are, and we are not going to back down. So just keep the good fight going. Don't be disheartened. In fact, let this fuel you so that we can keep doing what we love to do, which is tell our stories, write our stories, share our stories, and show the people and the world that we exist and we are here to stay.
And here are some commentaries we collected from various industry advocates who are making their voices heard. We start with Namrata Tripathi of Kokila Imprint from Penguin Random House.
Kokila publishes stories and storytellers that have historically been marginalized from traditional American publishing. We focus on books for readers 0 to 18. And we're the proud publisher of works by Ibram X. Kendi, and in January, we will publish a book written together by Dr. Kendi and Nick Stone. Although this is a panel on book banning at large, I'm going to take this moment to focus on children's books, as it's a space that reveals so much about the broader book banning efforts. As a culture, we make art about what's important to us. And when entire swaths of our population, kids who are Black and brown, queer, disabled, poor, or undocumented, don't see themselves in books, we send a very clear message to them. The absence speaks loudly. And so Kokila aims to publish stories that center those readers, those children. Some people have suggested that this is a niche undertaking or a radical mission, but I find it to be neither. It's simply a reflection of the world that we live in, and I'm not sure when reality became niche or radical. I made a home for this imprint at Penguin Random House because of the company's tremendous reach, commitment to protecting writers against censorship, and the ability to support more equitable access to books through partnerships with organizations dedicated to protecting free expression and the right to read. So, what is the work of children's books? Picture books, the illustrated ones that you see for the youngest readers and listeners, are a child's first introduction to poetry, to art, to visual storytelling. They establish for kids how the world works and their place in it. It is nothing short of a primer on how to be a human. Books for readers 8 to 12 catch kids in the years when they're developing their sense of justice. If you've ever talked to a 10-year-old, you know that they care about what is fair and what is right. And young adult books are made for young people about to enter adult society, and these books invite them to consider how they might contribute to it. Ask anyone about the 10 books that have shaped them, and most likely, at least half of them are from their childhood. Because this is where readers and thinkers are made. So it is no accident that over the last many years, the focus of book bans have shifted more and more to the world of children's literature. And now, this space is arguably the primary theater where this battle is being waged. And what's at stake is painfully apparent and certainly well understood by those who wish to limit access to books. Books most often by and about Black and brown and queer people. If books connect us to ourselves, to our past, to our true histories, to each other, if they create lines of empathy and understanding, and most radically, if they show us not just what is or what was, but what can be, then the most dangerous thing about them is that they might lead to change. So if our goal as a society is progress, the obvious choice is to build an informed population connected to history and to each other, because these kids now will be the future voters and legislators and Supreme Court justices. And if the goal is stagnation or regression to a less open and less equitable time, then we see why there is so much energy and numerous legislative initiatives to suppress free expression. Luckily, there are so many dedicated frontline workers in this mission, from the journalists who bring attention to the attacks on free speech, to teachers working to build classroom book collections that serve their kids, to librarians who are bringing access across state lines to readers unable to acquire critical materials, to, of course, the writers who understand most profoundly how stories can change minds, lives, and maybe even the path of a nation. It is not hyperbole that this is a fight for the future of American pluralism. It is a fight to preserve and create the informed and inquisitive citizenry necessary for a functioning democracy. It is easy to dismiss the sphere of children and the stories they care about. But underlying that dismissal is a fear that if we let their minds grow, they will challenge us and the order of things. The question is, why would we not give our kids the tools to be greater than us?
I am so excited to read with you today. Our first selection is called Rosa, and it's the story of Rosa Parks, who... So, as it turns out, that book is banned because reading about segregation is divisive. But since almost any book with Black people these days is considered divisive, here's one that doesn't have any people in it at all. It's about two penguins and their little baby. Both penguins are boys. Well, I'm told that that book is also banned because of sexual perversion, which is weird because there's no sex in the book at all. Y'all, they adopted the baby. What do you guys want? A mommy and a daddy penguin so the kids can make sure that the penguins are knocking boots? All right, I've got one that they can't possibly have a problem with. Hop on Pop. What? Disrespectful to parents? You gotta be kidding me. All right, listen, there are plenty of books to choose from.
There has been an ongoing push to ban important children's books, especially about race, sexuality, and basically American history.
Right.
Give us your reaction to that.
I'll be absolutely candid and honest. It's embarrassing that we are banning books in this country, in this culture, in this day and age. We have this aversion in this country to knowing about our past, and anything that is unpleasant, we don't want to deal with. This is not going away.
Nothing goes away.
Nothing goes away, especially if you ignore it. So read the books they're banning. That's where the good stuff is.
That's right.
If they don't want you to read it, there's a reason why.
We also reached out to educators to ask their thoughts on book banning.
Thank you for joining us. Today we have Mrs. Sahagian with us, Kathleen Sahagian, who is an elementary school teacher that I know very well from our Kids Need Mentors program. And we are also joined by Laurel Hopkins, who is a retired school librarian. And we're going to have a conversation about book banning and censorship and how it impacts our young children. To get us started, I'll toss over to Mrs. Sahagian.
Hello, my name is Kathy Sahagian, and I am a first grade teacher in California, and I've been teaching for 36 years, and I've taught grades K1, 2, and 3.
Hello, Laurel. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you experienced as a school librarian.
Okay, my name is Laurel Hopkins, and I worked here at school, the same school Kathy has worked at for many years. I was 28 years the school librarian, not necessarily under that title, but I've also worked in elementary schools and classrooms and worked at other research libraries and stuff. So I'm pretty familiar with school libraries.
Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. Now, to get us started, let's talk about, banning books and censorship. What does that say to you?
Okay, I think that people overreact, and many times when people demand, or parents demand a book be banned or taken off the shelves, they haven't actually read the book themselves. And I think it's important that when your child wants to read a book, you read it along with them, because that could be a great lesson instead of just saying, oh, you can't read that, period, or we're going to take it off the shelf so you can't find it ever. So
I agree with Laurel too. I do think sometimes parents have not read the books, but I also think too, what you might find particularly not good is not necessarily what somebody else would feel. And I think everyone has a different viewpoint, and that's what makes our country great, is we can share those different viewpoints. And I think knowledge is power, and giving students the choice to listen to all aspects of science is really important, especially in our society.
Now, how frustrating is that, for yourself as a teacher, or for Laurel as a school librarian or former school librarian? How difficult does it make it for your job and, for the children when parents are not well informed and they're up in arms about something that they feel is a threat to them?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of fear on their part, which I think is misplaced.
I've been lucky enough at our school that I've never encountered a parent saying that they've been upset by a book that I've chosen to share with my students. But it would be very upsetting to me, because I make very careful choices in the classroom. And I pick certain authors because I want to represent a different perspective. And so I always try to remember my why of what I'm doing and anything that I'm teaching, so that if somebody were to come to me and say, why did you pick this book, or why did you pick this author, I could have some rationale or explanation as to why I chose it. But I'd also say to parents too that might get a little bit upset about my choices, I would probably give them the book, ask them to read it, and then have them come back in and speak to me like in a conference forum or in a private time, and really have a chance to really discuss the book fully and see if we can't come to some understanding between their perspective and mine.
And now, how do you think book bans affect your students and the children? How are they impacted?
In younger students, probably not so much, because most of the very primary books are not as controversial as the kids age into junior high age. And then it becomes a little more problematic. And I know for myself, you know, if they tell you you can't read this book, well, guess what book I want to read? I want to read that book. And my mom always read books along with me when I checked the books out of the library, just because she was curious as to what I was reading. And I would hope that we could teach parents to do that.
I agree with Laurel too. When a book is banned, it becomes highly sought after, and it makes you want to read it more because you want to know what was it about the book that people found upsetting or didn't agree with. I also think, like Laurel too, you just have to read the book to see what you think of it. But I think especially she's right with older kids. Again, if they're told not to read something like that, they're going to want to go right to it. And I just think having different perspectives it's really important in the world. I think at times it has become a political thing where certain groups have had certain feelings about books. And as a teacher, I want to present the whole world and not just my perspective. I want them to have choices in what we read. And I also want them to come to their own conclusions, and through discussion with other students. That's where big learning comes. You know, not every student in my classroom is the same, comes from the same background, the same experience. And so everyone has their own perspective when it comes to reading a book.
Does it surprise you at all that a lot of the books that are being banned, censored, even at the younger level, are very innocent books, such as, Where Are You From? Or, Undefeated. What is it? A mooncake for Little Star. I mean,
No, David.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a hilarious little, you see the backside of a little bare bottom boy, and the kids think it's hilarious. But a lot of people have complained about that particular book in past years.
And, and representation has become so important for me as a classroom teacher. I want students to see themselves in books. And the books that you've mentioned are some books that are so powerful and can lend to such big conversations that yes, I mean, to me, you could find something in every book that would probably bother you, but I would never want to be that person that makes a judgment for someone else. I think that's what the beauty of reading is. You get to make your own judgments about things. And so somebody saying this is just not right, well, I just think that that's not a good thing for our world.
And for people who are trying to figure out, well, why is everyone upset about this? And, why are bans bad? And, what do you say to them? Like, why should people care that we're having this conversation?
Well, I think people should care because I think students sometimes don't have as big a voice as society does or parents do. And if we don't care, who's going to care? And if we don't stand up for students and different perspectives of the world, then that's kind of the society I don't want to live in. I want to be in a society where we can embrace all different cultures, embrace all different thoughts and feelings. And I think I always say this too as a teacher, if we don't stand up, who is going to stand up? I just feel very passionate about, if I see something that I don't think is okay, I want to be the person that makes it better or makes a change.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Laurel?
I think she said it very well. And I think a lot of the problems with school libraries is, who's going to order the books for your library? I mean, if the librarian does it, I mean, we count on, certain organizations such as the ALA that recommend books for certain ages and things. But if we don't have don't have that ability to order books for ourselves, what do? That's kind of hard.
So now, what has been your experience so far at your school currently? Like, have you had to, take books off the shelves? Has a parent or, an administrator asked you to remove books off your shelves that have been banned or requested to be removed?
I don't recall any of that. I know that sometimes in the past, quite a few years ago, we had a student be upset by some character in a book that used the word damn. And I was trying to explain that this character was a grown-up and they were very upset about something. So that language, meant it expressed the character's concern. And sometimes kids pick up on things that grown-ups don't, but I've never really had much of a problem here. It's mostly just trying to weed through the collection and get rid of old, outdated books and stuff.
And as a teacher too, our community of families have always been very respectful of us and have always haven't been questioned many times about the choices that I've made in the classroom, which I really appreciate. But I know across the country that's not the case. And I feel very, very sad and heartbroken that teachers have to encounter that on top of all the work that they do, because I think all teachers want to do what's best for their students and make careful choices. And to be scrutinized in that way, I think could be so upsetting and difficult, making the job even more difficult.
And now I'm going to ask you, what do you think this says about the way things are currently, like in the current environment?
Well,
you go first.
I think
that's a good one.
I think it's really too bad that the society in general has become so splintered and so much opposition to certain things. But all you can do is present different viewpoints. And that's what's good about having such a great selection of books of all different viewpoints from all over the world, all over the country, rich, poor, black, white, brown, whatever. And I think that's important for kids to be able to explore without having to leave their classroom or their local neighborhood.
I think our country has gotten so political, and it's just coming into the classroom where the outside world has a different viewpoint. I always feel like sometimes when I'm in my classroom, I'm in a bubble, and I like that bubble because, it's a safe place. You can be a risk taker, and all of those things. But I do think the climate has become highly political. And I think even now more than ever, we need to see different perspectives. We need to be able to make decisions about things that we've learned and hear all sides of the story, all sides of history, all sides of different perspectives. I think it's very easy to have one viewpoint, take over the entire schooling system, but I don't think that's the right way. And I don't think that's a part of education that I would want to be a part of.
And lastly, what can kids do to speak up about censorship, book banning? Like, children never feel that they have power. Like, how can we empower them to speak up and voice their concerns?
I think writing letters are always great. I think, and I also think that these authors that are on these lists of being banned need to get letters from students who love their books, that support them and say, more than ever now, I just think that children's voices being heard and being represented is really important.
Well, it's like when we do during book week is, what is your favorite book, or having your favorite book parade and things like that. I mean, you find a great variety of books that they choose.
And before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask, is there anything else I should be asking that maybe I've missed or didn't think to ask, or that you think is important as a takeaway for anyone watching?
I think that supporting your local library, supporting the school libraries.
And local bookstores.
And local bookstores, if we have any left.
And I also think, too, if a book is banned, I'm going to support that author, because I feel like I want to be someone who makes a change. And so I just think people in general, we just need to stand up, and stand up for what we believe in. And I just think this book banning is very upsetting and very heartbreaking. And whatever I can do to support authors' points of view, I want to support them. I want to go to the local bookstore and buy their books, and I want to support them in any way I can.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts and your views on book banning, censorship, and what people can do to make a difference, because it's so important to empower children and their parents so that they are informed before they decide to make a rash decision and request that a book be taken off the shelves, because a lot of times, as we're seeing, that they are books that are needed, not necessarily a book that is of detriment, because some of the titles that we're seeing on these lists are harmless, and it's just by a person of color or someone who is marginalized. So yeah.
And too, you wonder who is making these lists and how they're getting their message across the media and doing what they're doing. I just find that so interesting. And it never says like what group has decided, not that I recall, what group has decided to say that this is not okay.
Yeah. And in some of the news reports, we're finding out that there are parents with a political agenda, or parents who just don't want certain kinds of books, on the shelves with certain kinds of experiences. Because as we know, marginalized, BIPOC, LGBTQ communities are the most impacted.
Right.
So
very true.
Again, ladies, thank you so much for joining us. We sincerely appreciate your time and your thoughts on this, and have a great day.
Hi, my name is Sadia Faruqi. You may know my Yasmin series, which is read by little kids around the world. But did you also know that almost all the Yasmin books have been banned by a few school districts across the U.S., as well as my middle grade novel, A Place at the Table, co-written with Laura Chauvin. Is it surprising? Not really. Books with Muslim characters and characters of color and immigrant families are all routinely banned, sometime or the other. I don't feel particularly insulted or horrified, though, because censorship isn't new. I saw it in my birth country of Pakistan all the time, and I see it here in my adopted country in the US as well. But it will never stop me from writing, from using my platform and my voice. Overall, banning books, whether they're my books or anyone else's, is Of course, a terrible, terrible idea. It's heartbreaking that our kids who need our books don't get access to them. We're really doing them a huge disservice. But if you're an author from a marginalized background, don't worry. And please don't let it dissuade you from writing your stories. We need those stories. They can't be banned from everywhere. They will rise and make their way to the readers who need them, no matter what. I have faith.
We also asked librarian Ann Miller her thoughts on how you can help participate in this important dialogue.
And now, how can people contribute to this conversation? You know, what can you say to people to make them understand the gravity of the situation that's happening?
We try to celebrate Banned Books Week in typically the last week of September, make them aware of it. We recommend that they read the books that are being challenged. You can go to ALA and look under their banned books information and find the top 10 most banned books of the year and read and see what is upsetting people and if you agree. If you don't agree, then you can consider writing to your letters to the editor, to your legislators, going to school board meetings if it's an issue at school board libraries, and defending children's and people's access to materials to read.
And what is the harm with banning and censorship that people aren't aware of? What is the harm and who's impacted?
Well, there's freedom of expression, and there's also freedom of access to materials and information. So if you ban books, you are taking away people's right to information and to know things that could be important to them. And it's not fair simply because it makes someone else comfortable. I certainly understand how parents can want to protect their children, but then they can review what their children are reading, but they shouldn't be able to say what other children can read and not read. So it can affect everyone, but certainly can affect children in particular.
All kids deserve to see themselves in books. All families and communities deserve to see themselves represented joyfully, respectfully, appropriately in books. And if a particular story doesn't feel appropriate for an individual or their family to read, they don't have to bring it home. They don't have to read it. But what they don't have a right to do is to prevent anyone else from reading or accessing a particular book. Stories save lives. We need all of the stories representing all of the diversity in all of our communities, because that's the strength of this world. And what worries me the most about this recent spate of book banning is that it's often spearheaded by people who actually haven't even read the books they're so concerned about. But rather, it seems to be an effort to erase, marginalize, even further silence voices who have historically not been heard. Book banning doesn't just frighten me, it angers me. It's something that we all need to be very aware of in each of our individual communities and fight back against.
You've heard from so many authors and members of the Desi Kidlit community, educators, librarians, and advocates about the impact of book banning. Like many of you, as a parent and as the author of Goodnight Ganesha, I too am concerned and scared by this detrimental rise in book banning. All I can add to the conversation is to speak up, be vocal, and continue to write and push for our truths, our stories to be told, to keep from being erased. We've come to the end of this presentation, Banned Books, a pre-recorded conversation. Thank you to all involved for helping us bring this important conversation to you. Thank you for watching. And again, I'm Nadia Solomon, and I was your moderator for this session.